Hello. So today's video is related to the two big legal documents that we have to have created. One, of course, the egg donation agreement between the intended parents and the egg donor, and then the gestational surrogacy agreement between the gestational carrier and the intended parents. These kinds of documents have been around now for decades. This process has been around for decades, so a lot of the terminology's already been defined, general practices kind of established, so it's not, these documents aren't being created out of whole cloth. They're sort of established protocols and procedures and things that would be expected. A big thing, though, is just tailoring it to any specifics of the situation. So, for instance, with the gestational surrogacy agreement, in this case, our surrogate is going to be in Utah, while we're in California, so the agreement needs to meet the laws of both states. And then, of course, any specific changes that individuals might want to make for one reason or another. So the start off with the egg donation agreement. That one was a little more straightforward, definitely shorter. For us, it was only 17 pages about. And of course, it starts off with the donor obviously agreeing to the various evaluations, physicals and psychological evaluations before the procedure, and then doing all the medical requirements, going to doctor's appointments, taking the medications, etc., doing everything in a timely manner, and also agreeing to have that sort of information accessible on some level to the IVF doctor and to the intended parents. Not that we actually saw, medical, physical documents about, her treatment, but that we were relayed information about those evaluations. Yes, they found her to be psychologically sound and physically sound, and everything seems to be as it should be. So we were given information, although we didn't actually look at specific medical documents. And then, of course, the other big thing being the parental rights, basically who has ownership of the eggs being donated. Basically, once the egg retrieval process occurs, the eggs are owned exclusively by the intended parents, who then have all rights and responsibility and control over what happens to the eggs, and also any resulting embryos and resulting children, all legally being owned by the intended parents. And then, of course, another issue is just the money side, the fact that the intended parents will pay for all of the medical treatments associated with the procedures, medications, and so on. The egg donor received some compensation for this pretty intensive process, all the doctor's appointments, the medications, the shots, the blood withdrawal, and then the minor surgical procedure to actually retrieve the eggs. It's all pretty significant. And then also the intended parents have to get special health insurance if there are major complications, because again, most of the time the IVF procedures are not covered by any insurance, but we needed an insurance policy in place just in case of really serious medical complications for the egg donor. Again, these are usually very rare, the main one being ovarian hyperstimulation, but it can happen, so you need to be prepared for that. And then, of course, talked about breach of agreement. Basically, if the donor decided before the retrieval actually occurs to no longer want to do it, obviously there's nothing you can do to make her do it, but then she would be responsible for any expenses that had been incurred, and if there was a breach of agreement but everyone decided to continue with the process, I imagine that would be something like the egg donor missing a doctor's appointment or something, then that would be fine. And then another big thing was future contact. Again, we in our agreement, had established that at some point the kids could choose to contact the donor and have a conversation with her. Again, as explicitly stated by the surrogacy agency, it would legally be when the kids are 18 or older, and it would just be one required meeting. And also in that future contact thing, it had information about how the donor shouldn't be trying to find out who the intended parents are, and the intended parents should be trying to find out who the donor was or is. However, since we were looking to have a more open relationship with the donor, we made sure that there was that clause in there stating that we could give our contact information to the donor, and then if she chose, she could then contact us and we could communicate. So sort of the legal agreement was the bare minimum, and we could choose to have more contact than that. And so we are trading emails occasionally with each other. We're letting her know how the process is going, because it's only natural to be kind of curious to know how everything works out. So that was the egg donor agreement. Then there's the gestational surrogacy agreement. That is much longer. For us, it was 47 pages. But of course, pregnancy is a lot more involved process that lasts 9 months, plus there's some agreements about any possible complications, I think up to 3 months after the pregnancy. Maybe it was 6 months. So basically, again, the surrogate is agreeing to the various evaluation procedures, psychological, physical, blood work, and then, of course, the implantation and the pregnancy and all the various doctor's appointments and so forth that are required for that, and to be involved and do everything she's supposed to do. Also, it includes, in this case, our surrogate is married, so her husband needed to get some blood work done, and also agree that these sort of things are going to happen. And of course, we were allowed limited information about the results. Again, didn't read any medical documents, but we were told, oh yeah, she did fine with the physical. Everything looks like the way it should be. She would be a great candidate. Also, of course, spelling out quite clearly that the surrogate and the husband agree that once the child is born, that child will be surrendered to the intended parents, that the child is 100% the intended parent's child, unless it somehow turns out that the child is actually the genetic child of the surrogate and the husband, which very unlikely, but I guess it's not impossible. And then, of course, not only that the intended parents are the legal guardians of the child, but also who would have custody of the child should the intended parents die during the pregnancy. It's sort of not something you want to think about, but it is a possibility. So we have to let them know who would then be willing to be the guardians of the child should that happen. Another big thing is a list of restrictions on the gestational carrier, the surrogate, while she's pregnant. Things like don't handle cat litter, don't do drugs, don't smoke, don't drink. A lot of things you would expect and you would hope any woman who's pregnant would avoid. Probably the big thing in it was that it stated no international travel and had some limitations on travel within the U.S. Early on in the pregnancy, as intended parents, we weren't too concerned about travel within the U.S., but obviously toward the end of the pregnancy, the goal is to have the delivery occur at a specific hospital with the obstetrician that the surrogate has chosen and is working with, so you'd expect that she would stay near that area toward the end of the pregnancy. And but she could contact us and say, hey, I really need to make such and such travel to somewhere late in the pregnancy, and we could give her permission. And I mean, odds are we're going to give her permission, because it's obviously got to be something serious and important to her if she's wanting to make that kind of trip toward the end of the pregnancy. And then, of course, there were a lot of difficult topics that were brought up besides the death of the intended parents, such as termination of the pregnancy, how we, the intended parents, have to agree that if it's determined that the health, welfare, or life of the gestational carrier is at risk, that the pregnancy could be terminated. I mean, we, of course, are agreeing to that. That makes 100% sense. And then, of course, the surrogate also has to agree that the intended parents could request an abortion if there is significant defects in the embryo. But, of course, we've been doing all kinds of tests to try to make sure that it is a wonderfully healthy embryo and fetus and baby to be. Then it talked about life support if, say, the surrogate needed to be placed on life support, basically was medically brain dead or whatever, but by keeping the body alive would allow the pregnancy to continue for a healthy birth. And then, of course, a more happy topic, just who's going to be present during the delivery. In our case, the surrogate really wants her husband present, and we're 100% fine with that. And if for some reason only one person can accompany our surrogate, then that's going to be her husband, because they've got a system worked out. They've done this a few times already. So, I mean, all we are spectators. The intended parents were just, be nice to be there, but we're just spectators. We want everything to go well. And, of course, as always, talk about money, how we'll be getting insurance to make sure, all the medical expenses are covered and the intended parents are responsible for all that, and what sort of compensation the surrogate would get for any complications, such as hysterectomy being needed or cesarean section, or if we're all surprised and there are twins, that sort of thing. And also that there would be regular compensation during the pregnancy that the woman would be able to keep if, for instance, there's a miscarriage, because, that happens. And also that there would be life insurance policy in place just in case the surrogate dies. And, of course, the money would then go to the husband and the family. And also, of course, the exact amount that the surrogate would get for being our gestational carrier. And then, of course, there's a part about the breach of contract, which is more complicated in this case because, of course, there's a pregnancy. And once the woman is pregnant, she's not going to want to terminate the pregnancy per se, but and so the intended parents still have to agree that they are the parent and will have custody of the child, even if there's some sort of breach of contract. It's all spelled out. It basically makes sense, but it's complicated because we're dealing with this potential life. And there's no easy way to just stop the pregnancy that would work out best for everyone. So it basically is a little more complicated. And of course, then if some reason there's a breach of contract that nobody could help, there's act of God, major pandemic issue, accident, whatever, then everyone just accepts that that's what happened. So yes, a much longer document, much more complicated, and tending to require a little more give and take agreement between the intended parties. And so I hope that explanation of what the documents are like was helpful to you.